I'll tell you something very interesting. You know, our city was in uproar last week, if you remember, when a photographer took a photo of a man who was pushed onto the tracks instead of trying to save him. The photo ended up on the front page of a large newspaper, and the photographer's excuse was, he said, listen, I only had 22 seconds, what was I going to do? Besides, he said, other people were there and they did nothing too. I thought to myself, what would Raoul Wallenberg have thought of a New Yorker who let his fellow neighbor die without doing a thing? The Talmud tells us in Masechta Sanhedrin that one who saves a life saves a world. And we understand that. A person can have kids and grandkids and friends and relatives. A life matters. In essence, that is really what Hanukkah today, the first day, is all about. A handful of people said enough is enough. They refused to stand by, and instead they stood up to those who were empowered to end persecution. And that was nearly 2,200 years ago, folks. But only 68 years ago, one man stood up and was counted. Raoul Wallenberg made the ultimate sacrifice for doing the right thing. Nobody knows exactly what fate he found among the Russians who seized him in January of 1945. His family spent their whole lives looking for him. One thing is for sure, like so many victims of the Holocaust, Raoul Wallenberg doesn't even have a gravesite. As many of you know, Borough Park is home to the largest concentration of Holocaust survivors in the United States. There are literally thousands of people here in Borough Park who trace their lineage to someone that Raoul Wallenberg saved. Many of us would not be here today without Raoul. And that's why we're here today, on the most important commercial strip in Borough Park, recognizing Raoul Wallenberg. It's not a coincidence that the community of Borough Park, the population of which is 100,000, is the same amount that people that Raoul Wallenberg saved. Just think about that. What a vibrant community. 100,000 people living in Borough Park. That is the amount of people that Raoul saved. And it wasn't easy, as the ambassador pointed out. He was just 32 years old. He left his family 2,000 kilometers away. And it surely was more difficult than extending a helping hand to someone who had fallen from a railway platform. As Peter pointed out, when he arrived in Budapest, of the 750,000 Jews, there were only 230,000 left. And he knew that he had to break the rules to save lives. He invented the Schutzpass. He created those villages with 30 buildings under Swedish protection. But what's incredible is that could have been enough, but it wasn't enough for Raoul. He actually risked his life. One day, I heard this story, actually, I couldn't believe it, and I looked it up and found 3 sources. One day he heard that an unusual amount of Jews were going to be shot in the Danube River. The Nazis did this in an especially barbaric way. They would tie 3 Jews, they would shoot the one in the middle, the one would fall and would weigh the other 2 down, who would drown. Raoul Wallenberg turned to his staff and said, does anybody here know how to swim? Not knowing what it was for, maybe some competition, they raised their hand. He said, great, we're going to the Danube tonight, the freezing river, we're going to jump in, and they saved dozens of lives. When Eichmann started the death marches, Wallenberg showed up, he gave out food to the people who were on the death marches, and as much as he can, he gave out those passports, and he saved thousands of more Jews. And when they started the trains again to the death camps, they were picking people up. Wallenberg sped over. This is an incredible story. He jumped on the roofs of the cars of the trains and handed out passports to the people underneath. The Arrow-Cross, the fascists who were there, literally shot at him to prevent him from doing so. When he was done giving out hundreds of passports, he got off the roof and he said, I demand as the representative of the Swedish government that you let all these Swedish people go because they have my passports. They didn't know what to do. What were they going to do? There was a man, an official person, a country that had stand neutral. They said, okay, we guess we have no choice. They literally let hundreds of Jews go. But it doesn't end there. The story goes that 2 days before the Russians were set to liberate Hungary, Wallenberg got wind of a plan that was going to exterminate the 97,000 Jews of Budapest. He actually tried negotiating directly with Eichmann, but it didn't work. So he had a high-ranking officer in the police force and an Arrow-Cross member who he had bribed, because Wallenberg knew that sometimes that's what you needed to get done. He bribed, he extorted, he threatened. He sent a message to the Nazi general in charge telling him that if in fact he went forward with this massacre, he personally, Wallenberg, would make sure that this person was brought up on war crime charges. And that, in fact, is what stopped the massacre of 97,000 Jews just 2 days before. It's difficult to understand how it is that a person can stand by while another person is dying and do nothing. But it's equally difficult to understand how a person can risk everything to save someone of a different religion a different land, 2,000 kilometers away from his home. Raoul Wallenberg did the right thing, of course. He was a genuine hero, but he wasn't alone. There are nearly 25,000 people who Yad Vashem recognizes as righteous among the nations for saving Jewish lives. The message is clear, as Hillel taught us over 2,000 years ago. In a place where there are no leaders, you have to stand up and be a leader. It's a lesson that we celebrate today, and while Raoul has no resting place, here in Borough Park we will eternally pay our respects to Raoul Wallenberg by naming this important thoroughfare in his honor. This sign will be a place where people can come to someone who didn't make excuses, who didn't shirk his responsibility, who didn't look the other way, but rather stood up and made a difference, and that is the ultimate lesson of Raoul Wallenberg. Each and every one of us can and must make a difference. That is our responsibility as citizens of the world.